Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy and proud to be here today, very pleased to be here today to welcome you to the sixth annual FCC Former Chair Symposium. We have a great uh, program scheduled for you today. We have a great panel, and uh, to kick it all off, I'd like to introduce a friend of mine, a friend of MMTC's, the former FCC chair, Richard Dick Wiley, who has been very instrumental in my career and also, like I said, been very helpful to MMTC. So without further ado, Dick Wiley.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and thanks also for your long friendship. It's always a privilege for me to participate in this MMTC conference, and especially today when I have the pleasure of introducing FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Our guest twice has been nominated to serve as a member of the FCC by both Presidents Trump and Biden, and each time he was unanimously confirmed by the Senate. Commissioner Carr has also been the agency's general counsel, a top legal advisor to former Chairman Pai, and even once worked for a law firm that I know well. Among his many regulatory achievements, Commissioner Carr has led the FCC's groundbreaking telehealth initiative, designed to reduce costs and improve service, especially for rural and low-income Americans. He has also spearheaded the Commission's upgrade of its infrastructure rules designed to facilitate the development of 5G wireless. And in so doing, he stressed the need to expand our nation's skilled workforce, that is, construction crews and tower climbers, that are really essential to building next generation communications networks. And to demonstrate his dedication to this cause, he once even climbed a 300-foot tower himself. Oh my. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming this outstanding public service servant, Commissioner Carr.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Wiley, for that very kind introduction. As you indicated, I got my start many, many years ago now, back when I had a full head of hair, or at least mostly full, back 20 years ago at Wiley Rein. And you took a risk on a young lawyer, and I really appreciated both that start that you gave me at Wiley in the telecom area many years ago, but as well as your friendship and mentorship over the years. And it's really, really great to join so many of my good friends and former FCC colleagues at this event. I really look forward to the discussion. I'm happy to say a couple words on the policy front as well. I will say my docket is getting a little more full these days. There seems to be a lot more requests coming in to hear from me and hear from my views on policy, particularly over the last month or so. I haven't seen that much interest in my policy views, frankly, until 4 years ago at the same time of year. I think it must have something to do with the changing of the celestial bodies, the stars moving in the sky. I'm sure it has nothing to do with any sort of surly or earthly considerations of man. But either way, I'm really, really glad to be here. Great to be with MMTC. MMTC in particular has been such a strong advocate for so many of the policies that I sort of take close to heart and try to advance at the FCC. And my work with MMTC started way before I joined the FCC as a staffer all the way back in 2012. So I've really appreciated the friendship of so much of MMTC's leadership, your advocacy on policy, and also for the work you've done to promote young lawyers in the space. So great to be with all of you. The FCC, I've really enjoyed working at the agency as a commissioner for almost 6 years now, and as a staffer again for about a dozen years. As a lot of the chairs that are going to be speaking or on here will tell you, the relationship between the FCC chair and sort of the senior commissioner of the other party has been noted to be more like cats and dogs or oil and water than any other type of description of a relationship. But to be honest with you, I've really enjoyed my time working with FCC Chairwoman Rosenworcel. The moment she came in as chair at the FCC, she reached out. She asked if we wanted to do a telehealth visit together, which was an issue set that has been sort of near and dear to my heart. And we did that. And we've sort of been off to the races from then. We've worked really well together on a broad set of bipartisan issues, whether it's telehealth, as I noted, or really picking up the baton from the leadership that Chairman Pai showed on both the telehealth initiatives, but also on national security and public safety matters. We've worked to follow through on so much of the key steps that Chairman Pai keyed up, whether following through on Huawei or ZTE, or taking further action on China Mobile, China Telecom, the national security portfolio, where the FCC really, I think, turned the corner for the first time under Chairman Pai's leadership, is one where we both continued and in some ways have been able to, with additional statutory authorities, keep going. We've also worked well together to bolster competition. We worked to bring more competition to apartment buildings, one of our first actions together. And again, that followed through on an order on a NPRM, on a notice that was teed up by Chairman Pai. And so it's been a good run of continuing some of those efforts. We picked up on wireless resiliency to make sure that our networks are robust and resilient after natural disasters and other hurricanes. So I've really enjoyed that work. At the same time, obviously being in the minority, I don't agree with everything that's going on right now in sort of tech and telecom policy. And at least around the edges, I've tried to make my points clear on that. I think when you step back, a lot of the chairs that I talk to, they like to focus on sort of two main deliverables of their time in office. And in the last, few administrations, it's been putting up wins on spectrum and wins on infrastructure. And I think those are sort of two core areas where I feel like we're not, keeping pace with the cadence that we'd hit on the last administration. I think there's a lot more that we could do to sort of unleash economic growth for the country if we keep moving forward by freeing up spectrum and also on infrastructure reform. Right now, as a country, we're spending a lot of money subsidizing internet build, and in many cases, I agree with that. But we're not following that up with streamlining the permitting and other reforms that are necessary to get the shovels turning. And so we're basically stepping on the gas and the brakes at the same time. And one area where I've been somewhat vocal on that has to be with the $42 billion BEAD infrastructure initiative that the Biden administration has chosen through legislation to run through the Commerce Department or NTIA. And we're now in excess of 970 days since President Biden signed that law into enactment. And we're still at a point where we haven't had a single shovel's worth of dirt turning or people connecting. And to me, I think BEAD is a program worth fighting for, but it does need a course correction. There's some extraneous conditions that have been layered on that through the administration that in some cases either were prohibited by the law that was passed or at least aren't consistent with the express terms in the law itself. And I think that there's a way forward there where if we can eliminate those extraneous conditions, we could actually see dirt turning even faster in connecting Americans. We can do it in a way that we're going to save money as well. Right now, the way that BEAD is structured, we're going to be spending dollars on the penny compared to a different approach if we'd pursued in a more tech neutral way. So I think there's still time there, whether it's through the Biden administration or otherwise, to correct course and start delivering some more wins on that front. And then generally, look, some of my predecessors, particularly on the Republican side, have talked about coming in with a weed whacker and getting rid of all regulations. I've tried to take a different approach. I do think that there's some pruning that we need to do in the regulatory garden. There's a lot that we do need to get rid of, a lot of regulatory overreach. But I also think there's some room for, putting some common sense regulations in place that are consistent with public interest. And that's the course that I've tried to chart at the FCC. And again, there's more we can do, I think, on national security. There's certainly more that we can do on the spectrum front. And there's more that we can do on infrastructure as well. And I, welcome the ability to continue to work with my colleagues to make some more progress on a lot of those common sense approaches. So with that, I'm happy to sort of end my opening filibuster, and I can either stop for a second, either Robert or Mr. Wiley, and either chat with you all or take some questions, or you want me to sort of keep spinning through my talking points. I'm happy to sort of do whatever makes sense for you all as well.
I think keep spinning would be great. We
Cool.
didn't open it up for audience questions. So if you don't mind, unless Mr. Wiley, who I always defer to, probably just as you do, has some questions, I would just keep spinning.
Yeah. The other interesting issue area that we've been dealing with a lot across the federal government has been the rise in the use of artificial intelligence. And you can see that to some extent at the FCC, some places where I think it's within our jurisdiction, for instance, with robocalls. The statute itself talks about artificial or pre-recorded voice, so AI. I think that's one issue area where AI and robocall, the FCC has some authority. But more generally, I think I'm a little concerned about the administration's approach to the regulation of artificial intelligence. The way I think of it, I think we need to find what I would sort of describe as the middle bowl of porridge. I don't believe in sort of the full-on, fundamentalist libertarian approach of zero regulation for the technology. I do think we need some common sense guardrails in place on it. But on the other hand, a lot of what I've been seeing coming out of the administration itself looks like documents that may have fallen out of a salon in Brussels, meaning I think it's a little bit too overly regulatory. So I think we have to try to find that sort of Goldilocks middle when it comes to the regulation of AI. And more generally, I think again we have plenty of room for making more progress, whether it's on spectrum or infrastructure. But also stepping back, there's been a lot of interest recently on some fundamental changes to administrative law. And as a former general counsel myself, I've followed some of these developments, whether it's Jarsky on the enforcement side or the overruling of Chevron on the other. And I think those are really significant moments that we at the FCC need to pause and think about. Obviously, a lot of you are sort of steeped in administrative law, so I don't need to give sort of the 101 on this. But in general, my view of the Supreme Court's overruling of Chevron is directionally a really good thing, because what it does is it puts, whether it's individuals or businesses, on a much more level playing field with an administrative agency if there's a need to go to court to challenge an interpretation of law, and ultimately make sure that the power remains with where I think the framers of the Constitution put it, which is in Congress. And a lot of people say that Congress is very dysfunctional right now. I have my own opinion on that. I'm sympathetic to some of those views. But at the same point in time, a lot of the inability to get laws passed in Congress is a feature, not a bug of our system. It was a response to the over-legislating that the framers saw back on the continent. And part of the problem, too, is when you had Chevron, Congress could punt on some core, tough issues and hope that the administrative state, when their political parties in control, could go for complete victory through administrative regulations. And now that the Supreme Court has indicated that's not going to be the same way going forward as it's been in the past, I think this puts a lot of issues squarely back in front of Congress to do the tough work that they're the ones that are elected to make those decisions. So I really like ultimately the balance of power from Chevron being overturned, putting everyday people on a level playing field with the FCC and putting the ball back in Congress's court to legislate. I mean, look, deference to an agency isn't necessarily deregulatory, the overruling of it. Any decision we make, whether it's regulatory or deregulatory, the agency is going to have a slightly tougher time in court than it did before. In the main, I tend to think the lion's share of what agencies do tends to be more regulatory than deregulatory. So we think in the main, that's where you're going to see some of the outcomes of Chevron. And then real quick on Jarsky, sort of a nerdy case, but has to do with enforcement. I think people sort of fundamentally, instinctively understand this concept that one body should not be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And when it comes to administrative agencies, you can add a fourth, which is the lawmaker as well. And that concept of separating those roles, I think, is sort of common sense to a lot of people. And Jarsky really underscores that there are sort of enforcement actions, whether it's the FCC or other agencies, that the Supreme Court is indicating should not be within that same single administrative body. And so one thing that I've called for recently is for the FCC to take a look sort of top to bottom at our enforcement procedures and see whether they need updating in light of Jarsky. That way we can make sure that if there's bad actors out there, they're not going to escape based on the FCC not having updated its approach to enforcement. So again, across the board, I think there's more opportunity for us to sort of spur on economic growth through more spectrum, through more infrastructure reform. I think we need to keep up the great work that Chairman Pai has done on those fronts and also on national security initiatives. But then again, take a close look at where we need to be in light of Loper Bright, the overruling of Chevron, as well as Jarsky on the enforcement. I think these are going to be big issues to come. And of course, I'll just end with this, the perennial issue of universal service. I continue to think that we need to look for a path forward put that program on better, more stable financial footing. I've put my ideas out there, which includes looking to large technology companies to start to contribute. But either way, I'm open to a sort of a good conversation on that.
Commissioner Carr, there are a few questions in the chat if you want to address them, or we can end it. It's up to you.
Well, let me just ask the commissioner one question, Bob. And
Yeah, go
that
ahead,
is,
please.
how are we going to be able to make more spectrum available for further development of 5G and even 6G wireless? And how about the commission's ability to regain its auction authority?
Yeah, those are good questions. You know, there's two things that are going on with spectrum at the same time. They're a little related, it's sort of tail wags dog. One, as you noted, the FCC Spectrum Auction Authority has expired for the first time in our history, and that's not a good thing. But there are actually spectrum bands for which our auction authority has not expired. In fact, there's a law passed in 2015 that called on the FCC to start an auction 2 weeks ago, this July, for 30 megahertz of spectrum. That deadline for the FCC to commence that auction of 30 megahertz of spectrum, again, our authority to conduct that auction still exists. That deadline came and it went. Why did it come and go? Because the Commerce Department had a deadline of about a year or so earlier to identify the specific frequencies for which those 30 megahertz of spectrum would be identified, and the administration missed that. So yes, we don't have spectrum auction authority right now. That's a problem. But we do actually have authority to take some spectrum actions, whether it's that particular auction or unlicensed spectrum. And this is not an administration that really has put the pedal down in terms of being able to free up more spectrum. And I think it comes from the top. We just need much stronger leadership that understands the value of America leading the way on wireless. Again, if you step back during Chairman Pai's term, he freed up on the licensed side alone 6,000 megahertz of spectrum. And in comparison, the Biden administration's national spectrum strategy identifies 2,000 some odd megahertz of spectrum for study, not for freeing up, just for study. And I don't think anybody's looking at that, anticipating that we're going to get a single megahertz of spectrum out of that strategy anytime soon. So we're just studying a fraction of what we actually freed up. And so I think this comes to the very top of the administration, the government, and understanding that U.S. leadership in wireless is in fact part and parcel of our geopolitical leadership. When we free up spectrum, the world takes notice. Capital flows our way. Our regulators and officials have stronger footing when it comes to international bodies for standard setting and making sure that technology will develop in a way that serves our interests and not our adversaries like China, who we're falling really far behind on, about 700 megahertz behind right now when it comes to licensed mid-band spectrum. So I think it's fundamentally, it's a shift at the top of understanding the value of spectrum. But frankly, we can also keep going on our own with the bands that we still do have authority to auction on.
Bob, are there other questions from the audience?
There is, I think someone had asked a spectrum issue, which you just did. We also had a question on NAB's consolidated federal lawsuit against the FCC, seeking the state of rules in a 2018 quadrennial order regarding local ownership rules. Any thoughts?
Yeah, look, generally, I think we're heading the wrong way on media regulation. You know, the most recent quadrennial review, the scope of the FCC's effort there is to look at eliminating regulations that are no longer necessary in light of competition and other developments. And instead of doing that, the FCC, in at least some ways, used that proceeding to increase regulation. And I think the FCC's approach to media in general is, very outdated. I mean, you look back, our regulations originated in a very, very different era. It was an era in which people got their news and information two ways. Once in the morning, when the newspaper clunked on the front doorstep, and once at night, when you sort of tuned through the rabbit ears to get to one of the three national networks. And we see so much robust competition taking place right now in the media space, and yet the FCC is just sitting there. My biggest concern is that what the FCC did with newspapers is potentially the ghost of Christmas future for broadcasts as well. There's many broadcasters that are doing great, that are very healthy. But when you look at the industry in general, you look at the ad revenue and the advertising dollars and where they're going, it's a huge whooshing sound going from broadcasters towards their unregulated big tech competitors. And as you saw newspapers declining from the late 90s into the 2000s, there's lots of reasons for it. It was complicated, whether it's Craigslist or otherwise. But the fact of the matter is the FCC had rules in place that was prohibiting additional investment in newspapers, our cross ownership rules, while you saw thousands of newspapers going out of business. And we just sat there. And I think that that's a risk for the FCC with broadcast. I think we're really at a break glass moment where we need to look very closely at how do we incentivize more investment. We need to do a level playing field proceeding, in my view, at least in NOI, and look at all the regulations that apply uniquely to broadcasters as compared to their competitors. And we should eliminate the ones that we don't need. And if some of them are statutorily required, we should go to Congress. But, look, there's a saying in Washington that democracy dies in darkness. And if that's the case, it may be the FCC that's the one that's turning out the lights by continuing to put these heavy-handed regulations in while so many of America's broadcasters are struggling to find the capital necessary to invest in local news and reporting.
Commissioner, we all enjoy high definition television, but of course there's another thing out there, next generation high definition. What can be done to accelerate the continued growth in that area?
Yeah, I'm really excited about some of the technology innovations taking place in broadcast. I think ATSC 3.0 is obviously sort of chief among them. I think that holds a lot of promise, not just for benefits for consumers, which I care about, whether it's, as you pointed out, better television experience, but it's also effectively just a download pipe, an internet download pipe. And that unlocks all sorts of additional revenue opportunities out there. I mean, broadcasters can participate, whether it's as another sort of backup to GPS, whether it's, content delivery networks effectively using the broadcast downstream pipe. But it's been held back because the FCC has sort of maintained, I think, for too long, the requirement that broadcasters continue to disseminate their content in 1.0 and 3.0. That's not spectrally efficient. So I think we need to move much more quickly to give broadcasters the freedom to cut over to 3.0. And look, transitions in technology are something that we deal with all the time. My background is the mobile wireless side, right? We've gone from 1G to 2G to 3G to 4G. Imagine if you had to come to the FCC for permission to retire one technology. We wouldn't be the leader in mobile wireless that we've been up to now. And I think that's the type of model that we need to take. So a quicker transition to 3.0, I think will make that technology succeed, but also unlock new revenue growth opportunities for broadcasters themselves.
Commissioner Carr, I know that you had a limited amount of time, so I appreciate it. And we could probably go on for another hour with Q&A. I mean, and the topics you've covered. I mean, I have an ATSC 3.0 task force meeting today, shortly after this. So that's a very big topic. As you know, my background, I'm formerly a broadcaster. I haven't been general counsel of Post Newsweek stations. So I always enjoy hearing and talking to Dick about broadcast issues. But I really want to thank you for coming on. I knew that you would do it. You've always been very kind to me with time and things. I remember when we served together on the FCBA on the exec committee, and I appreciate working with you there. I think that's where I first got to know you well. I also learned from David Honig, the president emeritus of MMTC, that you worked for MMTC back in the day, and he still brags about you being one of the best writers, editors that MMTC has. So we really appreciate what you did then, but more importantly, we appreciate what you do now, because as you know, there are a lot of issues where MMTC and you are aligned, and that is really, really helpful. So thank you for
I appreciate it. And thanks, obviously, agree. Shout out to David Honig. He's fantastic, and it's great that MMTC has benefited from his work over the years. I've enjoyed, the chance to partner with him on a lot of issues, including now, MMTC in particular was a real strong backer of this idea called zone casting, where we're looking to give America's radio broadcasters the ability, if they choose voluntarily, to geo-target content, which could help expand the pie from a revenue opportunity perspective, but also serve their local communities with, again, sort of targeted content that makes sense. And MMTC was a strong backer. Again, that was another idea that Chairman Pai teed up that we're following through on. There's sort of a theme to the FCC's work right now. I think Chairman Pai, if he didn't get it across the finish line, he got it pretty darn close, and the FCC was able to sort of punch it in the last couple of years since then. But the zone casting one was another one that, again, MMTC put their shoulder to the wheel on that one. I think that's going to be good both for the communities that you all serve and are interested in, but also in terms of, again, expanding that advertising pie for broadcasters as well.
So thank you. We will now go to our sizzle reel. Thank you, Sue.
The MMTC 2024 Former FCC Chair Symposium thanks our sponsors. Our gold sponsors: AT&T, Charter Communications, Comcast, CTIA, Microsoft, NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, T-Mobile, US Telecom, and Verizon. Our sustaining sponsors: Geo Broadcast Solutions and Roberts Broadcasting Company, iHeartMedia, Lerman Center LLC, and 2042 Media, formerly Condista. Our general sponsors: Asian American Broadcasting, Bustos Media Holdings, Morita Coley, Covington and Burling, Davis Wright Tremaine, Free State Foundation, Brodsky, Caparino and Kaufman LLP, Kelsey Strategies, Erwin Krasnow, Nicolene Lazar, Mass Local, Mays Foundation, Motion Picture Association, Perkins Coie, The Walt Disney Company, Wiley Ryan LLC, and Wilkinson Barker Nauer LLP. Thank you for helping to make this year's symposium possible.
Yeah, I'd like to particularly thank all the sponsors, and there are so many unnamed people that also help us, but you know, to make it possible for us to do the great work that we do. We had a lot of work that we've done this year. I hope many of you saw our Juneteenth program with our Black Churches for Digital Equity. If not, please go to our website and check that out. It was a very, very important program as we discussed issues, and as Commissioner Carr pointed out, you know, we are working in the communities to try to get the BEAD money properly spent and make sure we have a seat at the table or a place in the room where it happens, as they say. Now we come to the fun part of the program, because we have so many issues that have gone on this year and last year, and as we look to the future, I'm so looking forward to hearing from the former chairs. You know, when I started my career at the FCC back, I'm not going to say how far ago, but I know I had aspired to be a commissioner, thought that would be one of my life goals, to be an FCC commissioner. Never made it, but you know, I never had the ambition to be chair, because I thought that was a goal too high, and because of what it takes to be an FCC chair. So that's why I particularly look forward to hearing from them. I know, you know, because I've gone through quite a few over the years, and I appreciate the wisdom. I appreciate what they do once they leave the commission. So we have a great two moderators to take them through some questions and answers. I've got to start off with the Honorable Debbie Tate. I got to start off with her because she's on my exec committee, and I would be misplaced if I didn't start off with her, and she's been a big help to MMTC. I also will introduce my good friend Jonathan Adelstein. I've known Jonathan for many years. I think Paul Nash introduced us many years ago, and so he's always been willing to be here with us as well. They will introduce the panelists. The bios for everybody are in the chat, so please take a moment to read those, and please sit back and enjoy. That's what I plan to do this session. So, Commissioners Tate, Commissioners Adelstein, it's on you.
Well, thank you, Robert. And I'm glad I was able to achieve your lower ambition of being a commissioner. And I'm glad that we have with us here the higher and more ambitious chairs, and my good friend Commissioner Tate, who also achieved that goal. We are thrilled that you invited us and the great work you're doing, Robert, at MMTC. It's amazing how after the years you and David have done so much to promote all the goals of MMTC in so many different aspects of telecommunications and media. And it was great to hear from Commissioner, Brendan Carr. He really, I've been listening to his policy views the whole time. I didn't just get interested lately. I think it's been a pretty interesting set of issues. He was such a great leader on infrastructure when I headed WIA. And he continues to be leader not only in infrastructure, but on so many issues. And we appreciate his great work at the commission. I want to get started. I think Debbie and I were talking about how we have all these ex-chairmen and nobody's really sure what they've been up to. We want to hear just a quick, maybe a couple of minutes from each of them about what they're doing. I mean, Debbie's been off heading up the Supreme Court inner workings in Tennessee. I've been in telecom finance now, and I'm finally, after 60 years of waiting, in an operational role in a telecommunications company providing actual service to end users in the rural Southwest called TWN. So we continue to evolve. Such interesting things. It's hard to keep up with what all of us are doing. So I'd really like to hear, basically, from the chairs, what are you up to these days? Are you doing any work now with the FCC? Maybe let's go in reverse historical order. We'll start with Ajit and then go to Mignon and then Mike and then Reed. We all have your bios, but we want to hear what you're doing now, if you could fill us in.
Well, thanks for the question, Jonathan. And it's great to see Commissioner Tate and, of course, all of my distinguished predecessors here on the screen, including Acting Chairwoman and Commissioner Clyburn, who I had the chance to serve with for several years at the commission, and of course, Commissioner Carr, who preceded us. So for me, I have been in the private sector for a little over 3 years now, and I've been working at Searchlight Capital Partners, which is a global investment firm based in New York and has offices in other parts of the country and the world, but I'm based here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I have the chance to work in both the private equity and the digital infrastructure sides on investing in companies that are really trying to do what we tried to do at the commission when I was there, which is connect more people with cutting edge services and products, whether it is Televisa Univision, where we've invested a lot of money to provide Spanish language content to reach people throughout the Americas, or rural broadband companies that we're investing in, which are hiring people locally and building robust fiber-based networks in parts of the country that have been left behind for far too long. It's really been a joy, and I enjoy being able to leverage some of the things that I learned at the commission while learning the ropes of finance in a very deep way. And so I feel very blessed to have had my time at the commission, which gave me a good foundation for the work that I'm doing now.
Good morning. It's great to be here and see everyone. I often say when asked that question, I went out in the private sector to see if I was right. So one of the things I've sort of have this hybrid, and that should surprise no one, construct. I am on a couple of for-profits or public and nonprofit boards, including the University of the District of Columbia in Benton. I have a consulting business where I still interact with some of you and many in the grassroots community. So that part of my life has not changed. And so some of the things that I learned and grew from at the agency and during my time as a state commissioner, I am applying on the other side of the ledger, but my heart is still with the agency and what it does. And it makes me note this week the significance of tomorrow, that a certain item that means a lot to me that is now called Bringing Common Sense and Fairness to Correctional Facility Phone Rates is first up on tomorrow. It's an issue we've been working on, that I've been working on for well over a decade personally, but a couple of decades with those who care about just and reasonable phone rates for those who are incarcerated. So I say that I'm still on those calls, I'm still monitoring. And my heart is still in the same place, but some of my activities are on the outside.
I'm not sure if we lost Mike here. Reed, maybe go ahead while we're waiting for Commissioner Cobbs to return.
You want me to go ahead, Jonathan?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Reed. I guess I'm the what am I? The most removed chairman, historically speaking.
The most historic.
And most historic. I'm currently the chief executive officer of the nation's first national green bank. We have $5 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act. We are building a national network, including hundreds of community lenders. We are going to use the money to combine with private sector money in order to invest, we hope, over the next 7 years, approximately $100 billion in the clean power platform, with the majority of the money being spent in low-income communities. I've been working on this since January of 2009, when I was on the Obama transition team, and now we've achieved scale and are ready to go.
I'm not sure if we lost Mike, but hopefully we'll get him back and hear about all the great things he's up to. It's amazing what you folks are doing. Deb, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. We'll take a break if Mike comes back on. He said he was having some electrical transformation done where he is located. And so it may have been that he's actually lost power, but I wanted to add my welcome to all of you all too. It's just wonderful to see you all. I wish we were back in person again. And thanks to Commissioner Carr. I've really appreciated his advocacy for rural America now that I'm back in it, and especially for his work with protecting kids online, that I feel like he kind of kept my platform going. So I appreciate that. And I have to do a shout out to Chairman Pai. Kind of like Mignon, I've kept a lot of those same issues. And, you know, I started working on the concept of 988 over a decade ago. And I remember our very first meeting with the largest mental health provider in America, and you champion that. And I feel like every day I read something about 988 and the great impact that it is having to give people access to the mental health services that they need. So thank you all so much. Given the events of this past weekend that we all watched unfold, now more than ever, I think it's so important that we talk about civility, not just by our leaders and not just in DC, but all across the nation. MNTC's own Lodestar has been about the empowerment of people through information, particularly children, and enabling them to be fair, tolerant, and inclusive. You know, there are always disagreements, and we just heard Commissioner Carr lay out several of those that are ongoing at the commission. But, you know, what can we do to get back to the days of Democrats and Republicans working together, conservatives and liberals? You know, do you all ever get together and talk about issues? Should you? You know, are you thinking about op-eds or giving some advice, you know, to the next FCC, whether it's a new president or not? There will probably be changes. So we'd just love to hear a little bit about you as a leader and trying to bring civility to the FCC and beyond. So Mignon, you're the first person I see, and thank you for all of your continuing work on those issues. I know you were working on those when we were back at the state PUC, so thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. It's interesting that you have this mix, and the person I'm directing it to will probably smile a bit. Look, all of us come from different political, we have different political priorities, and our postures, you know, reflect that. But it is never, no matter how things got, no matter how tense things might have been, it has never closed the door on bipartisan cooperation, no matter how sticky things got. And so I think when your North Star are your common goals of broadband access, consumer protections, closing the digital divide, 5G deployment, and emergency communications, and ensuring that those are our North Stars. You're going to govern accordingly, and you are going to continue to work together to address telecommunications challenges. So my mantra has always been that I will never allow a short-term difference to close the door on long-term opportunities and the obligations of the American public. We will speak over, and we have talked over our differences, have we not, person who I'm speaking, and we have worked through them. We have acknowledged them, and we have moved on to do what we have committed ourselves to do. So again, regardless of my feelings, I never let that get in the way of the task at hand. I had an oath, and I was determined above all else to follow through on that. And I like to think that I've done that.
Thank you. Chairman Pai?
Sure, I'd be happy to take my swing at that problem. So, I think recently, well, I guess the way I would answer that question is answering it internally, so to speak, within the FCC family, and then the external issues that are presented by FCC policy. Internally, I think the FCC historically has gotten along relatively well. Traditionally, most communications issues are not partisan in nature, things like promoting broadcasting, increasing minority ownership, getting more spectrum out there, building more broadband. These are not things that have inherently a partisan affiliation. And I'd like to think that certainly during my time, and even during those of the predecessors who are on the screen, that that's been the way the FCC has worked for some 95% of the time. Even after my time at the FCC, that bipartisan spirit has continued. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Tom Wheeler and I penned together an op-ed in the Seattle Times promoting the need for Congress to really make an investment in next generation 911 to make sure that our public safety systems don't let people fall through the cracks when they have an emergency. And I think it's fair to say that Tom and I had a degree of difference during our time at the FCC, but we're able to collaborate on things like that. And that op-ed itself came from a joint letter from some 9 or 10 FCC chairs, including some on this panel. And so I think internally there's a lot of work that can and does get done because people like Mignon and I, hopefully, and others, really roll up your sleeves and go to work. The external issue, I think, is going to be more complicated, to be frank. There are some issues that unfortunately, once they really hit the nerve of the Vox Populi, become really heated and partisan in nature. And I think it's fair to say that I was the recipient of probably more vitriol, much of it racist and or violent in nature, than any commissioner in history. And it was unpleasant, to say the least. And I think all you can do is join ranks and denounce it when you see it, and just try to do what you think is right, and really support your fellow commissioners. And that's what really helped me get through some really difficult times at the commission. I'll never forget Mignon herself when I was told by security officials, hey, there's a bomb threat at your house, your children have had to evacuate your house. Like, she just took me aside and said it was going to be okay. And that little gesture meant a lot, and I haven't forgotten it all these years later. And so that's the kind of thing that, I think it would do well to really take the temperature down. Not that the FCC is, of course, driving the national discourse, but each of us has a chance to do our part. And I would like to think that all those of goodwill do join ranks when things get tough.
Thank you.
I'm
Reed?
back, Jonathan.
Yeah, so Commissioner Copps, we had asked everyone to kind of fill us in on what you're doing. And I said, well, you were probably dealing with your electrical system being out, but maybe you can share just a minute or two about what you're spending your time on.
All right, I do apologize. I live in a multi-unit condo, and they decided yesterday, the electric company, they were going to change all the electrical meters, and right in the middle of your introduction, it went out, and I spent the last few minutes trying to get back on because the power's back on. I apologize. When I left the FCC, which was a long time ago now, 12 years, I joined forces with Common Cause to take the issue I felt most deeply about, which was the state of our media. Worked with them for 12 years. I've recently retired from that. It's under the capable leadership of Ishan Mehta right now, our Media and Democracy program, but I still plan to speak out in my advancing years, and they are quickly advancing. A few health problems here and there. But the more, that sounds like a long time ago, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. And the 2024 issues, while different with artificial intelligence and all of that, the underlying rationale of the FCC hasn't changed. It's consumer protection and protecting the public interest and the plight of minorities and getting advanced telecom and broadband out to every American, and a media that really informs and evolves from its corporatized infotainment focus of right now. Have we made some progress in those years? Of course we have, but it's been like 30 years we've been working on broadband, and we're still, as Brendan said, haven't turned a lot of shovels around. And now we're compounded with an unbelievable assault on government, and we'll talk more about the Chevron doctrine and other things later on. I am really worried about staying power of the FCC and of modern 21st century government. I'm really, really concerned. So that's what I'm working on now. Same issues, a little broader, a little more expansive, and doing what I can.
Great. Chairman Hunt.
Hi, Debbie. The nation obviously is in the middle of a culture war. It's horrifying. It takes me back to when I was 20 in the year 1968, and we saw Martin Luther King assassinated and then Bobby King assassinated. It's just as bad as that year, and hopefully somehow the passions and the hatred and the inclination to violence will be tempered. I went to law school with Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. Sam recently was quoted saying that we're in a culture war and it was inevitable that one side would win and one side would lose. I think he's completely and totally wrong. He's had these views for ever since we were in law school together. I just think he's wrong. And I think it's very important that the Republicans and the Democrats at the FCC take a stand in the year 2025. Maybe Brendan will be the chair. He would be an awful good one. And I think it's really important that they take a stand and express support for the basic values that make our society a success. Values of free speech and tolerance and respect for each other. This is a culture war in which some people are against those values, and you find them in both political parties. And it's really, really important that the FCC not be silent on this topic, and that each of the commissioners find a way in 2025 to stand up for the fundamental principles that are the whole reason we have the FCC, which is diversity of opinions, diversity of ownership, independent speaking, all the things that MMTC, by the way, has always stood for.
Thank you. Well said. Commissioner Cobbs, do you want to weigh in on the question of civility and your time at the FCC?
Yeah, we've had our ups and downs. I think Jessica and her colleagues are doing a better job than has been sometimes done in the past. One reform that I have always advocated was doing something about the closed meeting rule and getting rid of it, so that during the pendency of a proceeding before the FCC, the 5 commissioners could get together in a room. Maybe you have to have a lawyer or 2 present, that's fine with me, and discuss the case. I think that would help dampen the rhetoric and slow down broadsides going one way or the other and attacks. And every time I testified before Congress, while I was there and after too, I testified on this, and I started off with some Democratic friends, but then got a lot of Republicans to come along. Joe Barton, who wasn't terribly wild about me when I first went to the FCC, and I became friends, and he became very active in this and pushed for the elimination of the closed meeting rule. Unfortunately, it got caught up in all kinds of other FCC, quote, reform bills, and they never went anywhere, so this didn't go anywhere. But I just think from the standpoint of civility, getting to know each other and lowering the rhetoric a little bit, doing away with that closed meeting rule would be a very good idea.
So I don't know if you and Jonathan remember, but all I tried to do was have us get together for box lunches.
That's
and
right.
and I couldn't even make that happen. So even though Sandra Day O'Connor somehow was able to do that with all the justices. So anyway, I will move on since you mentioned it. Let's talk about the highest court of the land, and they've been doing quite a bit of overturning recently. And Commissioner Carr certainly teed up the issues about his philosophy regarding Chevron. I bet there are a few people who are not in agreement with Commissioner Carr, and I would like to give you all an opportunity just to weigh in a little bit and give us your views about Chevron. As you all know, the Chief Justice noted that it was fundamentally at odds with the separation of powers, which is at the core of our Constitution, as interpreted by Hamilton and the framers. And so I just love for us to have a really frank conversation about how you all think this is going to impact the FCC and obviously every other administrative agency.
So you allow the non-lawyer to go first.
Please.
Look, I have to agree with people like Wade Henderson and Blair Levin. There will be more litigation, increased costs passed on to us because of that litigation. You've got enhanced court power. I think these are anti-regulatory shifts that will cause delays and possibly either the prevention or extreme slowdown of new rules. We're talking about a standard that was a basis for 70 court cases and 1,700 lower court cases, as you lawyers like to say, subject to check. So, I just really think these increased levels of judicial review and constraints on agencies will slow things down. And these log jams, I think in the long run will be honestly for those like me who want to keep progress going. I think that will be impactful. And if I could, I cannot help with being a daughter of a pair of parents who met in jail. I cannot help but mention what I think would be harms when it comes to disadvantaged communities, agencies like EEOC and HUD. I just really think that this decision has a long, deep, and troubling impact, because we all know that compromises are made when it comes to legislation, when it comes to policy, when it comes to statutes, and that means that there's ambiguity here. And so if at every turn where an agency is probably best suited to interpret intent, it is not allowed to, or there are delays there, I really think that greater specificity coming from Congress at this day and time, and with those realities, I just think it's not quickly coming. So I am really worried and troubled when it comes to that decision.
Can I jump in here for just a second, then I'll shout out?
Absolutely.
I think that the Chevron decision was just a catastrophic reversal of the needs of modern government, taking us back basically to the horse and buggy days. And people were surprised it went that far, but let's face it, Congress is incapable of writing legislation for every technicality and every contingency that comes before an agency. What does Congress do? They pass 1,200-page bills at the end of a session. They finish them up maybe at midnight to put them on the members' desk in the morning, and members have no time to read them. Members have no time to offer amendments. Leadership doesn't evolve it. Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't have time to read them. So it's just a given that it does not have the capacity or the will to craft such expert legislation that's going to pass muster with this court. We don't have an expert Congress, not supposed to be that expert Congress. So we need those expert agencies. And the consequences, I think, are going to be catastrophic for not just the powers of existing agencies, but the very existence of them. And I am more worried about the judicial branch of our government right now than either of the other two branches.
Chairman Hunt?
So if Loper Bright, that's the name of the case that overturned Chevron. If Loper Bright were the law in the years in which, the 18 months in which we administered the 96 Telecom Act, then almost all of the rules that we passed would have been reversed by the court. The way that law was written was just like Mike said, you know, the result of a compromise where Congress purposely delegated to the agency the resolution of a lot of tricky issues that were highly technical and highly economic in nature. So if Loper Bright had been the law, then the agency wouldn't have been able to do it. Let's say that Trump wins and Brendan is the chair. If he wants to do something important with the current legislation as the basis, he's got a really big problem. And the other fact is that if he wants to get Congress to pass a law that is written in the light of Loper Bright, meaning it is much more specific, much more clear in the dictation of the outcome that it wants, then he's going to have, number one, a really hard time getting that law passed, and number two, even if it is passed, he's going to find that Loper Bright is an invitation to tremendous delays in succeeding in anything he wants to do. So just as a practical matter, this is an anti-agency, pro-judiciary move, which means in turn that his number one job is going to be to rethink, number one, how the regulations are written, number two, how he's going to advocate for statutory change. He's going to have to be up on the Hill all the time trying to get the underlying framework rewritten. And then number three, he's going to need to beef up, not that there's anything wrong with the lawyers there, but they're going to need to add more, and they're going to need to add litigation capability because of this other case that is going to, where they're going to have to face the possibility of going to jury trials. So it's a really daunting challenge if he wants to make the agency relevant, just relevant at all.
Chairman Pai, clean up batter.
Well, I take somewhat of a different view from my friends and colleagues on the panel.
Imagine that.
So first, I think it's important, aside from the effects, to focus on the law. And I think the Supreme Court got the law right. In particular, the Administrative Procedure Act, as Chief Justice Roberts writes, explicitly requires courts to consider the legal aspects of a particular petition for review. And that is something that I think had been essentially watered down, if not eviscerated, by Chevron. Secondly, in terms of the broader separation of powers, Loper Bright fits into a broader set of decisions, such as Jarchese, which Commissioner Carr talked about, which involves administrative law judges and the like, the common thread of which is who makes the rules. Is it your elected officials who you have voted for with the express intent of vesting them with the power to make decisions that govern you? Or is it unelected, generally unaccountable bureaucrats like us who sit at agencies, do our best, but nonetheless are filling in gaps in cases involving sometimes very substantial questions of policy? And the Supreme Court essentially said, look, it is hard. That is the point of the system of divided government we have in a bicameral legislature. Gridlock is built into the constitutional framework. But that's not an excuse for Congress not to do the job. It has to roll up its sleeves. And I would say, at least during my time as chairman, Congress was extremely responsive in getting things done in a very adept and specific way. So many examples come to mind. For example, setting up the Rip and Replace program, which I recommended after we banned the use of USF funding from going to Huawei and ZTE. Passing Kerry's Law, which required multi-line telephone systems to allow direct access to 911 instead of having to dial an access code. So many different sort of targeted legislative solutions like that, they passed very quickly. And in addition to that, there's the budgetary process. And I'm sure, as every chair knows, having gone through that, there are any number of policy riders that can go on that can actually help the agency do its job. And so, to me at least, I don't think it is going to be a significant negative in the sense that it actually vests our elected officials with the responsibility to do something, to pronounce judgment, and then let the experts at the agency implement those in a way that I think is faithful to the law. Moreover, I would also say, look, we have the system that we have for a reason. I mean, it cannot be the case that the agency makes the law, essentially interprets the law for itself, either through Skidmore deference or through administrative law judges or whatever, and then expects everyone else to simply yield. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't seem to me to be a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's just simply a question of accountability. And in that regard, I think Loper Bright may cause some short-term disruption, but in the long run, it is far more faithful, I think, to the separation of powers and to the principle of democratic accountability than what we had before.
Thank you, Chairman Pai. This is such a dramatic shift in administrative law. I'd like to dig a little deeper into the impact of Loper Bright, and maybe just a few reflections as somebody who's got a little history myself. I remember back when I worked in Congress for 15 years, and there was enormous discussion what they called judicial activism. Funny you don't hear that anymore. All of a sudden, the idea of judicial activism isn't talked about on the other side because that's what we have. I've never seen a more activist case where the courts take upon themselves the role of expert agencies in such a dramatic fashion. And, having worked for 15 years in Congress back when it was much more functional, we got enormous amounts of bipartisan work done and a lot of legislation through, and working for the majority leader and sometimes minority leader. I saw how the sausage was made, and no matter how functional it is, no matter how much agreement there is, Congress saw its role to set broad parameters and have the agencies basically fill in the blanks based on that broad direction. Now, let's look at the FCC as in a little more detail about how Loper Bright might impact specific pieces of its jurisdiction. Maybe because we're at MMTC, we should start with civil rights. How do you see the consequences of the loss of Chevron deference on the ability of the FCC to deal with inequities, to deal with one of the issues which it covered, in particular, digital discrimination, but anything else on the civil rights or broadcasting agenda? Do you see an impact there? Anybody want to jump in?
I'll just make a quick comment. Look, we should also include the immunity decision, in the catalog of very, very important Supreme Court actions. The FCC, as we all know, from our jobs there, has prided itself on being an independent commission. It seems to me that the Supreme Court has effectively held, they weren't focused on the FCC, of course, but they have effectively held that if the president wants to call up the chair and tell the chair what to do, there's nothing wrong with that anymore. So I don't see that the wall that protected the FCC as an independent agency from the executive branch, I don't see that that is a very strong wall. I think that any president, this one or President Trump, can now call the FCC chair and say, I want you to stop this merger. I want you to approve this merger. I don't want you to enforce this rule. I want you to get rid of this rule. And the president is immune from any challenge on that topic, any challenge of any kind at all. That's what that decision means as I read it. Of course, it's not just about the FCC, but the point is that the entire structure of independent agencies that are the expression of the will of a bipartisan Congress. That's why there's Republicans and Democrats at the FCC. That doesn't matter anymore. We have a all-powerful president coupled with an anti-agency bias or attitude, let's call it that. That's the meaning of the Supreme Court's rulings. Agencies down, president up, and so this notion of a independent commission is perhaps a dead letter.
Well, I think Reed is so right. It's not just the FCC, it's all the other agencies that work for the improvement of minority access to telecommunications and to media too. It's just difficult to see how the long struggle for civil rights, equal rights in media and telecom is going to be advanced by this. I think the minorities generally come out on the short end of the stick of whatever happens. And, you know, we pushed at the FCC for if we can't do after the Iran decision something positive, can we do something halfway there like full file review where you take into consideration all of the background of an applicant, whatever. Couldn't get that going either. My biggest disappointment upon leaving the FCC was that we could not do more for minority populations when it came to ownership, when it came to broadband, when it came to 100 different issues across the whole spectrum of FCC jurisdiction.
I can't think but go, you triggered a memory when I was in my early 20s trying to find a place to live in Charleston. And I knew when I went to try to get an apartment that I was told that the place was full. And I knew the person that came after me, you know, got an interview. So when you're talking about, you know, things like that, where do I go now? What's, you know, what, you know, how do my those shortcomings, you know, get addressed? What about programs in SBA and labor relations and other places that are attempting to address, and Department of Agriculture, where you're attempting to address longstanding, you know, wrongs or historically discriminatory practices? What's there? What's next there? And so these are the types of things with that are worrisome to me when it comes to this decision. That is very narrow by way of interpretation, and very narrow by way of any type of remedy if any harm has been proven or shown.
I think I would say on that, I mean, I don't think there are going to be any negative effects to minority communities from Loper Bright specifically, insofar as Congress has vested the FCC with authority to take action. And so, you know, it's been a long time since I looked at this, but if I remember correctly, Section 628, I think, of the Act allows the FCC to have broad jurisdiction to go after any, I believe it's cable programmers or others who engage in unfair methods of competition or unfair or deceptive practices. And that has been affirmed in a very broad way by the DC Circuit in the Comcast case back in 2010, I think it was, way back when I was in OGC. And that's just a very good example of an authority that purposely has been broadly passed by Congress and interpreted by the FCC to prevent discrimination of the type that might otherwise harm minority communities. And so I think, as far as Loper Bright goes, look, the basic question is simply, has Congress pronounced a judgment on the question? And if they have, great, the FCC has plenary authority to go after it. And if they haven't, well, then I think it's incumbent upon Congress to act, to specify what the harm is that the FCC is charged with taking on. So I actually think in the long run here too, there aren't going to be any negative effects. And to the contrary, I think it would actually, to the extent it propels Congress to actually do something instead of talking about something, it would be a broad positive. It would force them to work in a bipartisan way to correct some of these societal ills that we see.
Maybe one other broad topic that is implicated by Loper Bright, but also, you know, it'd be very helpful to hear your policy views in general on universal service, which of course has major implications for equitable treatment. Reed mentioned that you couldn't have implemented the 96 Act without it. And recently I was talking to Greg Rohde, who helped write the 96 Act, who mentioned that it was about a paragraph, as I recall. You know, basically, the idea is to get everybody equal access at equal rates, and comparable, I think was the word, and specific and predictable. Very broad language, and yet the FCC has done enormous good with that broad language and put a lot of detail or flesh on the bones. And you look at FCC now thinking about the contribution factor, which again is very broad in its authority, but not specific. The 5G fund, which Ajit, you helped to get started. What is that in there anywhere? I can't read that in the paragraph, but I can see how it derives from it, and yet it's not explicit. Wi-Fi in school buses. There's a lot of issues about universal service. The basic contribution factor being maybe the greatest that Congress, for a long time, we've been talking about having them be more specific. But now, in low propriety, is there anything the FCC can do about any of these issues? Or are their hands completely tied on universal service? And what should they do and what can they do? Ajit, maybe you started this 5G fund. What would you do now?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I don't have any easy answers. And I think even aside from Wilbur Bright, universal service presents some pretty big difficulties, right? I mean, number one, obviously the needs of the people evolve over time. And so, of course, the programs under the Universal Service Fund have to adjust to reflect that. Number two, I think there's also the problem of the declining base. And this is an old chestnut that goes back perhaps even to Reed's time. I mean, maybe Reed saw the writing on the wall back then, too, when people were migrating away from telephone service, even in the 1990s. And so, Commissioner Carr has talked about broadening the base to include big tech companies who should have to contribute to the fund. That would require legislative change, of course. I don't know. And then on top of all of that, you add the fact that Congress, in a variety of legislative vehicles, has now allocated tens of billions of dollars to building out these networks across the country. $42 billion to the BEAD program alone, some $10 billion more through the Capital Projects Fund, and there are other legislative, ARPA and CARES Act, et cetera. So to the extent that these are successful and they end up building fiber or other advanced broadband technologies to everybody, how does the Universal Service Fund evolve just conceptually? And then on top of that, should we have different legislative fixes? Like if the FCC gets spectrum option authority back, shouldn't Congress allow the FCC to have more discretion in promoting some of the proceeds for the use of universal service as opposed to depositing in the Treasury? I mean, these are all very, very complicated questions. And so I hold out hope that at the end of the day, Congress is going to sit down, Republican and Democrat, House and Senate, and just figure this out, because it's such a fundamental waste of resources otherwise for us to be trying to fit this square peg of, every telephone subscriber pays in and, to the round hole of modern technology.
I am going to keep hope alive, so to speak, as another South Carolinian would say. But if past is prologue, I mean, I just look at the lapse in spectral, authority, and if that is any indicator of what's next. Again, I'll keep my oxygen mask close by because I won't last long holding my breath.
Well, it seems to me that when Universal Service Fund was passed so that Congress would be able to supply every American with the most advanced telecommunications possible, and there was a way to do that through the phone service then. The same goal should exist. Now most people get that through broadband, and you may be right, Ajit, that it would require legislation. I don't personally see why, because it's the same goal there. And it just seems to me that first step ought to be expanding that contribution base to include those who are currently getting a free ride.
Well, can I ask you just a hypothetical? You were obviously deep in this, Mike, and I think maybe Jonathan too. Back when Julius and all of you did the transformation order, let's just say that you decided, you know what, we don't have the authority to apply this money for broadband. Sorry, we just can't do it. Do you think Congress would have said, look, this is ridiculous. Broadband is the future. We are going to pass a law now that gives the FCC that authority? Or do you think it would have just languished and we'd be back in the voice? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would like to think that politically there would have been such a motivation for Congress to fix that problem.
Well, I think that's really hard to say, but broadband wasn't as big on the congressional screen then, as it later became. And we worked when I was at the Department of Commerce and working on telecommunications too, to get the president to even mention broadband in the State of the Union address years and years ago. Things have obviously changed now, thanks to Jim Clyburn and the money for broadband. But I don't think Congress would have been likely to do anything substantive in that regard.
I'll just add, the FCC, as we all know, transfers billions and billions of dollars from one pot to another, and does it in the name of addressing the fundamentally shaky economics of any service in less dense areas, rural areas, or in low income neighborhoods. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying I would hope that the Republicans and Democrats that compose the commission in 2025, under whoever is the chair, I would hope that the way they would think about the next 5 or 10 years is the idea of cross subsidization is not a reliable basis for promoting the continued upgrading of the networks. Sure, use what you can, but it's not reliable. What you really want to do is figure out how to create new incentives. I think Brendan said this a while back here in this nice meeting. You want to create incentives for businesses to invest in these new networks. And I think the FCC has failed to mobilize a Republican-Democrat consensus on that topic for quite a long time. I'm not faulting any individual. I'm just saying, let's all look in the mirror. It hasn't happened. And I think that consensus is critical. This is the same approach we're taking at the National Green Bank with respect to building the clean power platform. It isn't going to be built by government subsidies. It's going to be built primarily by private sector investment. That's why we're taking the public money and combining it on a 4-to-1 ratio with private sector investment. And it's the private sector, not the government, that from 1993 to 2003 invested $2 trillion in building the digital, cellular, and fiber optic networks of America. That's the accomplishment that the FCC, with unanimous voting, Republicans and Democrats on all the key issues in the 90s, that's the contribution that we made, in our time. That's the same model that is the only reliable model for continuing the constant upgrade of all network communications and connectivity in America.
So Reed kind of leads us into, and Mignon's going to need to put on her oxygen mask when I ask this. So ACP was successful, but just as Reed got through saying, totally unstable in terms of continued funding. More than 23 million homes actually saw their internet bills nearly double. So do we try to get Congress to continue that? Is it permanently gone? Are there any recommendations that you all have, or do we need to look at Lifeline? States have launched some of their own programs, and even cities have some funds. And then also, as Reed just said, some of the internet providers, AT&T, Spectrum, and Infinity, provide assistance to low income. So, does this need to be a public-private partnership rather than trying to get Congress to continue this funding?
I'll just say that part of what frustrates me here is not so much a series of outcomes, though that is frustrating enough. It is, I think, our, in some cases, unwillingness to learn from what these experiments. A lot of these programs and initiatives that have come from Recovery Act and all of the other series of infrastructure funding, we've learned lessons from this. And to me, one of the biggest lessons we've learned is through ACP, that with the proper calibration of dollars, you can get more service, you can get people to sign on quicker. What does that mean? Do we not see that when it comes to next steps in terms of our universal service construct? So that's what irritates me, a bit. Hopefully I don't lose more than one client on this, during this exchange, but it irritates me because, again, what have we learned? What do we see? And how should that govern what we do next, and how we reform next, and how we, approach these things next? And how do we stay as far away from going into our political and whatever corners and saying what I won't do or what shouldn't be done because it's never been done. When we have these examples of what could happen with these experiments, maybe no solutions, but just ensuring that all of us check our egos at the front door and look at what we can do and put into place to have a sustainable series of next steps for those millions who really cannot afford to eat and stay connected.
If people are really losing service, and apparently they are because of the disappearance of this program, then we are in total reverse of where we should be. I think public-private partnerships are wonderful. I've always been a strong devotee and advocate of them, but given the court situation we have now and Chevron, it might be that the courts would demand that Congress would have to supply this money if we were going to have anything like that. But to me, the bottom line, and I'm not trying to preach, but to me, access to high-speed broadband is a civil right. I've always said that you cannot be a functioning American without access to high-speed broadband, everything from jobs to health to education to even religion is involved, and you really put the brakes on an individual when they lose their service or don't have access to service. So I think we need to keep that that goal uppermost in mind.
I would just point out there's no reversing the fact that the economy principally depends on the exchange of information. Whether you're in a manufacturing business, whether you're in a social media company, it's the exchange of information over distance at the lowest possible price and the greatest possible volume is the fundamental platform of our country. But it's also the same. The same is the case with respect to healthcare, with respect to education. Just two family stories. I have a kid brother who's a teacher in McCormick County, South Carolina. I think Mignon will know that that's the poorest county in all of South Carolina. And when the pandemic hit and the students were told that they had to stay home, what do you know? Everybody soon discovered they didn't have internet access at home. So there he was teaching online to students that couldn't see him. And it was heartbreaking. I mean, he's spent 15 years in that school system, and this is what failed him, at that time, or more importantly, failed the students. My second son runs a software company that's involved in healthcare. The fundamental problem is that the information exchange of the healthcare information is spotty. So these are the reasons, these are the business reasons, the economic reasons, the social reasons, the ethical reasons why we want a robust universal platform. Mike called it a right. I would call it a necessity as well, right? I believe the best way to get there is for the FCC on a truly unanimous bipartisan basis to conceive of the business ventures it wants to promote, either by having a regulation or getting rid of a regulation, but you're also inevitably going to benefit if there's some tax credits, if there's some public money, to be dedicated as well. This is a big vision. I'm very, very hopeful that the next FCC will avoid the partisan battles that are simply depressing for everybody. At least I think everybody on this group would agree with that. Avoid that and create a really robust and new agenda so that arm in arm, the commissioners in both parties can go down to Congress and say, you all may not agree with each other on many things, but we agree with each other on this topic and you should support us.
Yeah, I like Reed's vision. I certainly hold out hope that happens. I guess the way I would answer the question is by looking to the future. I feel fairly confident that 10 years from now, if we were having this conversation, that virtually every American is going to have some sort of access to high quality mobile and fixed broadband with all of the networks that are being built, with all the subsidies that are being allocated. And so if you presume that, then at that point, I think universal service really does shift from more of a CapEx type program to more of an OpEx type program, where you're supporting those consumers who just don't have the ability to access it, for whatever reason. And so how do we get from here to there? What is the transition period? I don't have an answer to that, but I do hope that we think carefully about how do we really repurpose universal service over the next 10 years as these networks are being built out, so that people just aren't falling through the cracks at when I think it was, as Mike, or maybe it was Reed put it, that virtually everything that happens in either the individual or the commercial context now relies on the exchange of information.
Debbie and Jonathan, we can't allow the fear of change to paralyze us. I have always been open to looking at any type of restructuring that will get us to our prime directive, to that North Star. And it is connecting communities. It is doing so affordably. The business case has already been made time and time again across several sectors, several dozens of lines of opportunities and efforts. It is multiples of Ps. We say P3s, but there's so many subsets when it comes to those partnerships that everyone has a role, everyone benefits. And for those who are unwilling to tackle new ideas and new constructs that we can get internally and from around the world. There's some interesting discussions, to further get myself in trouble, that are going on in Brazil.
Good trouble.
When and so look, we can learn and unlearn, from what's going on in a number of places in debates. But we need to be, open to it. What's the goal? How do we get there? How do we smooth, and how do we give a little bit from our, in terms of our core, where our core basements are, that we can't allow that sticky floor to get in the way of progress. And to me, if we fundamentally say yes, we are willing to listen and move on and learn, from some of the debates that look a lot like ours around the world, then hopefully we will see international results that would propel us. I know it sounds pie in the sky, but I think fundamentally we need to agree on that in order for us to be open to other things.
Well, Mignon, the big one in front of us right now, of course, is the BEAD program. We were talking about affordability, and you mentioned CapEx, moving to access where there isn't any, no matter how much money you have. If you don't have access, you can't get on broadband networks. This is an issue that Commissioner Carr talked about at the top of the program. He had major concerns he expressed about how the program is being implemented and the speed by which it's being implemented. I would make a footnote that I actually was at a groundbreaking recently. So groundbreaking has happened. Zayo, you can look on LinkedIn, look on Zayo's website. The NTIA awarded them $90 million, more than any other company in the country. And we did a groundbreaking in Reno. I was lucky to be at a couple of weeks back for my Digital Bridge effort to help them win that. And we're underway. Those things are being built right now, and we're building towers along the way. But that's not to say this thing's going along swimmingly or that things are moving fast. That was the Middle Mile program. And now we have the $42 billion BEAD program. When I was at Congress, before Congress testifying, when I was at the WIA, I said, it's got to be technologically neutral, tried to fight to make sure that wireless had a seat at the table. We actually won in Congress, speaking of how that works. And we got reversed essentially by the agency saying technological neutrality means a preference for fiber. I don't know how you actually square those two. But now,
Sounds like a Loper Bright issue.
Yeah.
Well,
now you're on our side.
Little known fact, NTIA was actually exempted from administrative review in the BEAD program. Maybe they planned this all along in Congress. So very, very craftier and more detailed than we thought, because in the end, it's tied them in knots. I mean, now, we're in the business of actually getting this done on the ground. And the arguments I was making there was a rational network architecture is hybrid. Sometimes it's all fiber, sometimes it's got fixed wireless. But they're starting to realize that the states are starting to back off and go, oh my gosh, we've been sort of misdirected for a long time. I think even the NTIA is realizing what a mistake it was. And, these things are causing delays. Things are tied up in knots a little bit with the states and getting the states approved. how do you see it, maybe Ajit, from your perspective, with a big investment pool in rural broadband, and then we'll turn it to the others to get your reflections on BEAD and how that's going and what its potential is to really address this access issue.
Well, I think its potential is quite significant. This is by far the most massive public investment we've ever seen in broadband networks. And it's something that I envisioned when I gave my first major speech back in March of 2017, when there was talk of an infrastructure bill. And I said that there should be a title devoted specifically to broadband with major funding. So I'm glad that Congress spoke in a bipartisan way to get this across the finish line in 2021. Unfortunately, that potential is not yet really translated into reality here in 2024. There have been a number of initial proposal volume 2s from the states that still have not been approved, so that trigger, so to speak, hasn't happened, the one-year trigger for them to conduct their competitive processes. And that's been a little bit of frustration. There have also been some explicit or implicit regulatory burdens attached through the process that may not have been consistent with what the infrastructure law contemplated. And then on the state level as well, different states have different levels of capabilities. Some are moving ahead really fast. Louisiana, for example, was approved in December of last year. They're just off to the races. Other states, either because of resource limitations or policy limitations, haven't been as quick. And so I think there's, for those of us in the private sector at least, what did Churchill say in the context of Lend-Lease in the 40s? Give us the tools and we will do the job. That's exactly what the private sector is raring to do. This is the best opportunity we are ever going to have to really close the digital divide once and for all. So it's just been very difficult. And some of the issues are just, I think, practical. There's an appreciation of the practical difficulties. One quick example, which I think disproportionately harms minority entrepreneurs, the letter of credit requirement. I totally understand the need for there to be some sort of a skin in the game, so to speak. And so I think that the NTIA originally thought, okay, 25% letter of credit is the way to institute that. But what you saw is a great upswell of bipartisan concern about that, because 25% letter of credit essentially ties up a huge amount of working capital for some of these small companies. And essentially some of these smaller companies are doing the math thinking, you know what, I'm just not going to participate in BEAD because it's just not, either I can't go to a bank that's going to give me a 25% letter of credit. Some of these companies may have negligible or zero EBITDA. Or number two, I'll just, all that will be done by the bigger companies, which have access to capital, which just dwarfs my own. And so I think that would be really unfortunate. I'm glad NTIA has given a little more flexibility in terms of reducing the percentage of a letter of credit requirement and or allowing states to choose a performance bond, which is a much more flexible way. It doesn't tie up a lot of working capital for these companies. But that's just a very simple example of the practical difficulties that any entrepreneur, but especially minority entrepreneurs who are looking to solve this problem and leverage some of this funding have. And, time is not on the side for consumers who are off the grid. I mean, I think Mike was absolutely right that broadband is not a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. And this law was passed in 21 and, we just need to get those networks built and built quickly.
And Ajit, as you remember, we had our go at this too. This was a challenge, at the FCC with our programs and, our officers, work together, to make those adjustments. So you're absolutely right. Whatever the barriers are, including allowing for multiple businesses who have great ideas but are not equally situated to participate in the program, to allow for that type of positive disruption and to have something that's real fixable get in the way. Again, learning from each other and fixing what's broken in real time. Those things are very necessary.
Well, it's nice to know that an applicant has the wherewithal to deliver what it promises, but obviously we have to be sure this requirement isn't excessive or rewarding banks too much or discouraging smaller providers to even apply. I'm encouraged to learn that the FCC, I think, has an NPRM out there right now to lessen some of these requirements. That sounds good to me. And I'm sure our good friends at MMTC are working assiduously on this too.
Perhaps you all know the first rule of journalism. Don't get it right, get it written. And that's all I have to say about the BEAD program.
Very, very concise. And speaking of getting it written, what about AI? Let's talk to another big topic of the day, which is this is just so historic. A lot of you have been through historic transformation, the digital transformation, that year 2000 was kind of fizzled out, and other things that are much bigger, the cell phone. I mean, seems to me to be on that scale of the growth of the whole new technologies that transform virtually every sector. What do you think about the sort of downsides and upsides of AI? Certainly upsides for productivity, a lot of downsides for a lot of things, damage that could be caused, and some are fearing the end of the human race. Others think it'll be the great economic booster. And finally, maybe you could comment for a minute about, does the FCC have anything to do with this besides the fact that it will possibly increase the volume of traffic on telecommunications networks? Mike, you seem itching to jump in there.
Can I make a comment?
Reed, go ahead.
I think AI is a chance for the FCC to reverse what the hard reality that over the last 20 years it has become increasingly year after year after year a not very important agency. And that is not meant to be a negative comment about any commissioner or chair. What's happened is that the important issues in society have arisen in social media and seem to be about content, or seem to be or the important equity issues that we've discussed have not been addressed in a timely manner with appropriately sweeping legislation. And one way or another, the FCC collectively, year after year after year, adding it all up, is just not in the position of playing the kind of leadership role in expressing the best inclinations of the people and solving the biggest problems. Now, by contrast, let's look at Lina Khan over at the Federal Trade Commission. She has a really big fan in J.D. Vance. The two of them went to Yale Law School, but not together. And you might think, well, wait a minute, here's this very progressive chair, and here's a rock solid, Trump, recently become a rock solid Trump supporter, on the ticket. But the fact is that she has taken that agency, which has had some decades of being pretty moribund, and changed it to use it to address issues that are important to lots of people. And so Vice President nominee Vance is responding to that. Well, AI gives the FCC a chance, if it figures out what it wants to stand for, it gives the FCC a chance to be really, really important, because the fundamental fact about AI is that all the information that these data centers have comes over a communications platform, and all of the applications that AI permits to be administered go over a communications platform. And so if the agency can put aside the 15 years of fundamentally wasted back and forth on the net neutrality question and figure out how to establish an appropriate level of jurisdiction over the transfer of AI-based information, then it would really matter. Then it would really matter. And why does it matter that it would matter? Because you have to have some agency of government expressing the will of Congress and the will of the people. You can't have it be that nobody can do it. It's when no one can do anything that you have the rise in passion and frustration and temper, and even worse, the inclination to violence. That is the one thing we all know has to not be part of our future.
I agree completely with what Reed said. In my downer moments, which become more frequent the older I get, I sometimes wonder what's going to doom us first. Will it be climate change or artificial intelligence? No doubt it has tremendous potential to improve all our lives. It will be utterly transformative, and I agree that the FCC has a major role to play here. After all, it's given jurisdiction over everything with radio and wire and protecting the public interest. So it needs to really step forward in a visionary way. You know, there's not a lot of guidance from the founding fathers on artificial intelligence. So we've got to deal with this new problem creatively and expansively and in tune with the progress that artificial intelligence is going to give us throughout this century.
There's nothing in the FCC's orbit that it can escape when it comes to AI. So making the agency's rules as future proof as possible is a necessity. It cannot be on the sideline when it comes to these evolutions, including AI. Again, there is nothing that is not impacted in its orbit by it. So again, these when it comes to AI, things are getting increasingly baked when it comes to these platforms and technologies. So the agency can't afford to be hands off, and so I co-sign, acknowledge, and affirm what has been said.
And for my part, I'm not sure I haven't really studied it that closely what the nature of the FCC's direct authority over AI is or would be. But I do think that to the extent that the FCC can promote more positive uses of AI, for example, encouraging telecom companies to incorporate it to optimize the use of 5G so that, you can essentially target bandwidth where it's needed, that kind of thing, and also minimize its negative uses. For example, the use of AI in robocalls and other types of unwanted communications that are unwanted at best, and scamming our vulnerable populations at worst. I mean, those are the kinds of things I think the FCC can certainly use the bully pulpit, if not the pen, on.
You're so right, Ajit, about the security risk and other vulnerabilities that again cannot afford to be silent about at the agency.
Oh,
You're on mute,
Commissioner,
Debbie.
I think you're on mute.
Sorry, y'all. That was a perfect lead in because we wanted to talk to you all about privacy issues. Maybe this is once again the bully pulpit. Commissioner Carr actually co-signed a op-ed with my senator, Senator Marsha Blackburn, about the FCC's oversight of funding to schools. And yet schools weren't ensuring that SIPA and other regulations were followed to protect kids online in schools. With the funding that the FCC had provided. There are other pieces of the privacy puzzle that the FCC may not have much control over, but as you all say, they do have a leadership role and they do have the bully pulpit. So I guess quickly, because we're about to run out of time, whether it's the privacy of our children or our own privacy, do you all have any thoughts about how the FCC could use their leadership role? This ban or sell bill that I know that President Biden signed, but is obviously being challenged. And I know he is actually back on TikTok. So what are the cybersecurity threats that you all see? And is the FCC really doing all they can in terms of their role regarding cybersecurity? So maybe you all can take whichever one of those topics you kind of like best and shed a little light on it, because as I said, we only have a few minutes left.
I think we kind of dropped the ball on cybersecurity many years ago after 9/11, and I urged, with the expertise that the FCC has, that we should be stepping front and center in the interagency discussion of cybersecurity. That really didn't happen. I don't think we were sufficiently aggressive on that. Under Chairman Wheeler, I think we passed privacy policy, but Congress took away a lot of our authority to do much about it. We need to get that back, and in such a way that the courts won't reverse our taking it back. But the FCC is a logical place to play, if not the leading role, certainly a leading role in dealing with cybersecurity. And we have to get some, privacy is obviously so central to this whole 21st century broadband and AI and everything else, and we haven't made much progress on it. It's a crying need, and I hope it would be a priority.
I
Any
certainly
thoughts?
would. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just was wanting y'all to jump in.
No, I think Mike is absolutely correct in terms of the importance of cybersecurity. There's so many stories popping up. You hear about hospitals being held up for ransomware. AT&T recently, I think there was a story that they felt compelled to pay $400,000 to be able to correct a cybersecurity flaw. And most notably, I read a story a couple of weeks ago about a platform, I think it was called CDK Global, that essentially provides software for 15,000 car dealerships in the United States, and they were hacked. And so essentially every car dealership in the country, or a lot of these that relied on CDK Global, literally had to write down with pen and paper is some of the information that was critical that otherwise they would have been inputted automatically. And so, cyber is certainly one of the things that, what's the old saying? It's the good news is we're all connected. The bad news is we're all connected, and that creates an intense surface. And so I certainly hope that the FCC, DHS is CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and others with equity on this issue, along with members of Congress who have deep expertise and care about these issues too, can figure out a framework. But it always seems like the bad guys are one step ahead, and it's important for policymakers to try to keep up.
So look, AT&T just had a massive data breach. What is the FCC doing about it? I don't know the answer to that, but it should be on the front page of every newspaper, albeit in virtual form, not in paper anymore. But look, in my view, privacy, security, these issues are extremely technical in nature, but they also are intimately related to misinformation, disinformation, and the fundamental lack of trust that the American people have in any source of information. And the dismay and disgust that so many people feel about the purveyors of information. So these are really tough issues. And again, I would say if the FCC wants to matter, then in 2025, Republicans and Democrats ought to decide they're going to tackle these issues. It can't really be that anyone wants an authoritarian nation state to be manipulating our perception of reality. It can't be that people actually want that. So the FCC makes itself relevant or irrelevant, depending on whether it wants to engage on a topic like that.
The only thing I'll add, which is a compliment, I believe that what was said is the FCC has a seat at the table, and shame if it's outside the door. You cannot afford to not be there, a part of the conversations, regardless of where things begin or end. It is imperative that there is collaboration and there are mutually inclusive opportunities for all of the agencies to work together, and where things begin and end, someone should be at the table, ensuring that there are no gaps when it comes to protections.
Maybe turn to some audience questions here. We're kind of running low on time. I want to make sure we get some of them in the chat there that are relevant to MMTC and low-income Americans. One question was about bulk billing, which has been proposed by just generally. We haven't seen any actual proposal from the chairwoman. But full disclosure, I've got a bias because I'm on the board of a company that does bulk billing called OpticalTel in Florida. And this has a real impact on low-income folks, but maybe not the way that we're talking about. Basically, there's a discussion about allowing folks to opt out of bulk billing agreements. But if we do that, there's been a bulk of the comments in the record, and not just from companies, is that rates will actually go up, which is actually my experience from optical tele. Basically, we compete like hell to get these deals in a homeowners association. We give them the lowest price, and that's how we win. Provide good service. It was a competitive process. Usually, the community buys in. You have a consensus, the problem is that if you allow an opt-out, we lose the deals that allowed us to give the low price. So if we actually did do an opt-out, you would see rates go up for low income and minority communities, which I think is the opposite of what was intended by it. It was kind of politicized because it was done in conjunction with a White House announcement and maybe not thought through. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on both buildings to respond to the question we have here in the chat room.
Well, I for one am not wild about it. I live in a condo of 1,000 units. We finally got a second service provider in here, and I think some people took advantage of that for lower prices. It just seems to me that exclusive markets seldom translate into lower prices for consumers.
Yeah, I know it's been an ongoing issue. I certainly would like to see the NPRM if it's out there, and it's been handled on circulation as I understand it. But I think it would help promote a much more informed discussion about what's in and what's not if it were simply published, so that all of us could see it and debate it.
So we can't be here at MMTC without asking about the resurrection of the tax certificate in honor of Chairman Wiley and his original pulling together the task force, and a year later, after he had left, his chairmanship was adopted. So any thoughts about that?
Let's do it.
It is one of those issues that it seems like we all agree on year after year after year, and it never moves forward.
Yeah, I think Reed would probably have the best perspective. He was in office in the chairman's office, I believe, when it expired. So he might have a better perspective, on the issue than most. But
hey, Gene, I can't even remember the issue. Look, let me just say in conclusion, excuse me for racing to the door. I think there's so many issues where the FCC really should matter, and right now doesn't have a purchase on Congress, doesn't have a significance in most executive suites in America that it should have. Not because I don't, because I love the FCC, although I do, but because it's really a nice culture, all things considered, right? And
Yeah.
and all of you helped make that possible in your different tenures, and it's got a lot of expertise, and it's kind of there ready to be used. And there are plenty of ways for Republicans and Democrats who understand the FCC and understand what it can do to agree on certain missions, and let Congress dictate the preference, go this way, go that way. But don't just say, oh, I give up. We can't find common ground. It's hopeless. Let's not be very important anymore. That's the slippery slope to a dysfunctional government. And that is connected, in my humble judgment, to the unwarranted but real sense of anger and despair that characterizes too much of the attitudes of the American people. It's too depressing to watch this happen. Let's all wish for the comedy and the cooperation and the common mission, to come about. And for those of us who are veterans, let's support the R's and the D's next year and wish them well.
That sounded like a campaign announcement. I don't know if you're breaking news here, but
that's right. Maybe we could have an all old guy commission. Right?
There we go.
I vote for that.
Like an old man's army. Okay. Great to be with all of you. I'm going to sign off. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us, Reed.
Thanks.
Yeah, we just have a few minutes left here. Hopefully we get Mignon back in, but one topic that's so important for MMTC, I always think of it as a broadcast organization. Mike, I remember you and me going on the road on the DTV transition, and oh my gosh, we we split up the markets, and I forget who won the lottery and got Hawaii, but I think it was me. We did that transition wonderfully, smoothly. And now we got ATSC 3.0, which a lot of minority broadcasters looking at as a way to expand their opportunities to do additional channels. How long do you think that changeover will take, and what'll happen to the ability of broadcasters to use their spectrum wisely, and how does it kind of interact with 5G broadcasting? A lot of folks are also saying, look, the broadcasters should allow folks to meet them where they are, which is getting their input on their mobile device. And watching programming there, and 5G broadcasting allows them to go anywhere, but 5G broadcasting uses some of the spectrum that might otherwise be used for ATSC 3.0. I'd be curious to hear your views on how that's going, what the best way for broadcasters moving forward to get a diversity of viewpoints using this emerging technology would be.
Well, I'm no expert on that. It's an exciting technology, but I know there are challenges that it faces: recruiting an audience, competing with other new technologies, questions of cost, and I hope we can work those out. Technology moves ahead. I'm sure its time is coming, but it's a fluid environment. And as I say, I don't really have enough expertise in that to give you a brilliantly incisive response.
I think I would say that, look, broadcasters, just like any other competitor in any communications subsector, deserve the ability to compete, and we should maximize their incentive to compete and innovate. And ATSC 3.0, as I envisioned it back in 2017, when the FCC, under my leadership, authorized it as a next-gen TV standard, it was conceived as a way of letting broadcasters do what they do best, which is to that one-to-many platform or distribution model, migrating over to the internet. Essentially, it's an IP-based system. And so my hope was that this would give the green light to broadcasters to figure out ways to reach communities. And one of the great things about ATSC 3.0 is that you could really target or sub-target different communities with messages that were more relevant to them. And so, for example, for minority communities, either in terms of content or in advertising, broadcasters could really try to reach them in a way that they couldn't with just a sort of blanket one-size-fits-all distribution approach. And unfortunately, it hasn't gone as quickly or smoothly as I would have liked. And so I think it would be helpful for the FCC to do what you guys did during the late 2000s, or the first decade of this century. It's like, look, there's going to be a transition date. Yes, there's going to be disruption, but we're going to educate you, and here's how it's going to happen, and this is why it's a good thing. Because otherwise, you're going to keep having this muddling along piecemeal effort that doesn't really go anywhere. I think the second thing is, look, we all want technology transitions to be affordable. I obviously get that. But I think the notion that any ATSC 3.0 enabled equipment has to be free is just absurd. I mean, there's people are walking around with $1,500 to $1,000 phones in their pockets, and I think they would be willing and able to pay for a device that was ATSC 3.0 enabled because it would be better for them, and that would encourage the industry to invest more in it. And so I think that the FCC needs to have a more realistic approach to that than simply saying everything has to be costless. I mean, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and there's no such thing as a free device, unfortunately. But we really need to encourage ATSC 3.0 to give broadcasters a chance to compete in an ever more challenging marketplace.
And sorry about my disruption. I had to, I often hang out in libraries, and my time in that space ran out, so I had to move.
Yeah.
I just have to break up the monotony sometimes. Entrepreneurs have to do that every now and then. But what I will say on this is, you would remember this was an item that I did not vote for, in part because I had more questions than answers. I was excited about the prospect of this enhanced viewer experience, the interactivity and personalization, the portable reception promised in terms of mobile and other the new revenue streams, which especially for smaller entrepreneurs or owners, seemed promising. Public safety alerts and spectrum efficiency, all of these things seem promising. But I go back to that smaller the smaller entrepreneurs. I was never worried about the bigger guys. I was always worried about the singleton and people who had 5 or fewer stations, and what would be their affordability quotient, what would happen there, what would happen to me as a person sometimes has to be dragged to a next device. What could I see? What will I see? How much would I have to spend to be able to see and hear and experience? So these are the types of things, again, that at the time, in real time, I had promised, but too many questions, which is why I didn't support it. But I remain hopeful that those questions that were not answered at that point are being answered, and there. No one expects a problem-free transition, but we want one in which as many people as possible, as close to 100%, are able to migrate affordably and predictably. And I did not, again, in real time, did not have that comfort.
Well, it looks like we're out of time here. I just want to thank the panelists and my fellow moderator, Commissioner Tate, for a great panel. If you were out in the public, you would hear thundering applause right now, which you deserve for great answers and a great panel with good friends. What a wonderful discussion. Debbie?
Thank you all so much. Thank you to MMTC. I think we came to some agreement on a lot of really, really big issues that would keep and make the FCC extremely relevant and as we move forward in these transformational times. So I hope that all of us will keep advocating for the FCC to step up and be the leader that they can be on many of these issues. They are on the world stage. The world looks to the FCC for leadership. And so I, for one, will be encouraging that going forward. And thank you all so much for this robust discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Before I turn it over to my chairman of our board, Ronald Johnson, let me take a moment to thank all the panelists, thank the moderators, thank all the speakers, thank the audience for being here. I also have to take a quick moment to thank my staff. We have a great team over at MMTC, Dr. Fallon Wilson, Ananda Leaks, Kinley Joseph, David Honig, of course, Brian Dunmore, and Jewel Love, and all the other folks that come in and help us out, who aren't on staff, who aren't paid, but when we ask them to help out, they do. So with no more further to do, let me turn it over to Ronald Johnson, who will provide our closing remarks. Thank you. Ron?
Okay, thank you, Bob. Can you hear me?
Very fine, Ron.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so for all of the virtual participants who I'm sure have listened attentively and certainly enjoyed all of the comments, just want to thank you, Bob, and MMTC Vice Chair Tate for assembling some of our country's greatest and distinguished communication former public servants, all of whom I have connected with over the years as a part of the FCC Diversity Committee. And I think going forward from MMTC's leadership perspective, I think we should continue with the help of our supporters and sponsors to create forums and thought sessions like the one today that I think give rise for great ideas and voices to many varied opinions from folks who really know this industry very well. And so now as we approach, I think, our national, state, and local elections in November, I think the aftermath, which of course we cannot predict at this point, I think a follow-on to this session might be an important opportunity for all of us to begin to discuss the pathway forward for our industry. And so, Bob, thanks again. Look forward to working with you in planning our next session. And thanks again, all of the panelists, for informative and insightful comments. Thank you very, very much.
The MMTC 2024 Former FCC Chair Symposium thanks our sponsors. Our gold sponsors: AT&T, Charter Communications, Comcast, CTIA, Microsoft, NCTA, the Internet and Television Association,
Hey, Ron, how you doing? Great job.
T-Mobile, US Telecom, and
Hey, what happened?
Verizon. Our sustaining sponsors: Geo Broadcast Solutions and Roberts Broadcasting Company, iHeartMedia, Lerman Center LLC, and 2042 Media, formerly Condista. Our general sponsors: Asian American Broadcasting, Bustos Media Holdings, Morita Coley, Covington and Burling, Davis Wright Tremaine, Free State Foundation, Brodsky, Caparino and Kaufman LLP, Kelsey Strategies, Erwin Krasnow, Nicolene Lazar, Mass Local, Mays Foundation, Motion Picture Association, Perkins Coie, The Walt Disney Company, Wiley Ryan LLC, and Wilkinson Barker Nauer LLP. Thank you for helping to make this year's symposium possible.